Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as many of you know, I book in 10 guests a week to interview just to keep the show ticking over and keep me covered in the event of any cancellations or illnesses, etc. But every now and again, I just speak with someone I could just chat with for hours, no matter how busy my schedule is that day. And today's guest is one of those guys. His name is Jack Lee, and he's the CEO and founder of a company called Datassential. And he took a two-man company in 2001 and created a global food and beverage digital research powerhouse that is helping brands like Target Foods, Jack in the Box and General Mills and so many more innovate with data. And just to bring this to life, this is the company that predicted the rise of avocado toast and is helping restaurants and food service providers match new menu items with new consumer preferences. So I've invited him on the podcast today to unveil the tech behind food trend insights, the different models that to judge the performance of certain dishes, and how these tools benefit its customers, and how technologies such as database and algorithms are all helping push restaurants, food service providers and food brands into a new era and create targeted appeals to their customers. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US, where Jack is waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about how you got here and ultimately share your origin story with everyone?
Sure. My name is Jack. I'm one of the original founders of a company called Datassential. So we're here to help the food industry get smarter. And we actually got in an earlier iteration of ourselves back in the late 90s, where myself and a couple of my partners at the time, we thought we could maybe start sort of an online directory for restaurants. So if you think back to like the late 90s, if people were trying to figure out where they wanted to get something to eat, a lot of times it was, oh, what's in that drawer full of menus that we have at home? There wasn't a Yelp. There wasn't a lot of these other things that have become so commonplace today. So we thought we could go and literally call every restaurant in America by phone and ask them to fax us their restaurant menu. This is when fax machines were quite prevalent. And we actually did that, so we put together some capital and we formed a data center that would just call literally every restaurant in America, ask them faxed menu, and that data center would also manually input those menus into a database. And the idea was to give people access to that. The internet sort of crapped out at some point along the way, and we were stuck holding this really giant data asset of restaurant information and menus. And we realized that there was a real market need for that information, because the companies that provide food to the industry, that serve up dishes that get onto consumers' plates and whatnot, or the restaurant chains themselves, they were often guessing at, what the next big trend would be or what would work with consumers and what wouldn't. And we realized that if we could mine the data from something as seemingly innocuous as a restaurant menu, you could actually learn quite a really rich number of things. What foods are popular, how this varies by the area of the country that you're in, what's trending upwards, what's trending downwards, which flavors go with each other, as evidenced by what's actually succeeded at restaurants. So we transitioned into a company called Datassential, which is specifically dedicated to helping the food industry, both food at home and food away from home, understand what the next big things are and how to sell more effectively in that environment too. So that's the short form of the origin story. And food is an artistic pursuit. That's why they call it the culinary arts. But we knew that we could bring some science to that art and really live at that intersection of still promoting the creativity around really great food, really great dishes, but backing it up with numbers and data that just had never previously existed before.
And you've been on an incredible journey since then. I mean, it was a two-man company back in 2001, and you've created this global food and beverage digital research powerhouse that is helping some pretty big brands out there as well, such as Target Foods, Jack in the Box, General Mills, etc., all to innovate with data. So here in 2022, can you tell me a little bit more about that and the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers today?
Sure. So yeah, we're quite fortunate that many, if not most, of the world's largest brands, or a really strong majority of them, are already using our services in some way, shape, or form. And it tends to happen in two areas. One is innovation. What products should you be making? What products should you be serving up to consumers? What should you be putting on store shelves? What flavors should go in there? What goes together? What's the next big thing? And then also what we call smart selling. And the idea there is fairly simple. There is a pretty extensive value chain in the world of food. We think of food as, hey, this is the stuff that landed on my plate when I ordered something at a restaurant, or I popped something in the microwave. But there's lots of companies earlier in that chain, which, you have farmers, and you have producers, and then manufacturers, and then distributors, and then finally a restaurant or a grocery store. So we help enable smarter selling throughout that chain. And what you've seen happen, and we feel like we've played at least some small role in this, is that the entire world of food has become much more insights driven over the past 20 years. There used to be a lot of, guessing as to what consumers might want, but now companies are really focused on understanding, is this really a thing? Is this really a trend? What is it that's going to be best for my customer? And we help do that as well. More recently, we've tried to really help the industry get through some pretty tough times. So, a big portion of our business is still sort of on that restaurant side of the industry, as well as all these what we call sort of on-site places, which are other places that might serve food to you, but aren't a restaurant. So imagine the cafeteria inside of a hospital, or a workplace cafeteria, or a hotel that serves food. And obviously they got hammered initially when COVID hit. And we thought it was important to really give back and support the industry. So we published something like well over 100, maybe upwards of 150 pieces of content, reports, webinars, free data, free research. We've been doing it continuously since the start of COVID to try to get the industry back on its feet. I mean, if you remember at the beginning, no one had any idea what was going on, right? We just knew that everything was getting closed down. No one knew what consumers thought, what they thought would be scary versus not scary. Should your staff be wearing masks, gloves, both of the above? Is it important to wipe down surfaces all the time? Does that still matter as much today as it used to? Is there a belief that maybe high temperatures will kill the virus or something? So we try to cut through all of that, and we basically provided that to the industry for free. And I actually think for all of us at Datassential, that's been quite gratifying, knowing that we actually made a real difference, and I think helped some more businesses survive that period. We're in a different area now where we have the aftershocks of COVID, where it's supply chain, inflation, and labor. And it's interesting. We did an informal poll of industry insiders just a couple of weeks ago. And the question asked of the room is, what is a bigger challenge, or what has been a bigger challenge? COVID itself, with all the closures and consumer behavior changing, or the after effects of COVID, supply chain, inflation, and labor? And the vote was 99-1 that it's the aftershocks that are a bigger challenge. It's tough right now. So if you're a restaurant, for instance, and you have a menu you've really thoughtfully laid out, and this is my menu, these are all the recipes, this is what I want to make, and you order your items from your products from the distributor, you expect those products to be there. But right now, fill rates, the number of products that actually arrive compared to the number of products you actually order, it's not the 100% rate that we've historically seen. Sometimes it's maybe like 95%. And you might think, well, geez, 95, that's still good. That's still an A, like on any test, but it's actually catastrophically bad. Imagine you have these specific recipes that you've developed over time that all your customers are expecting. And for every 20 products you order, whether it's mayonnaise or steak or something else, if one of them doesn't show up, it throws that recipe into chaos. It becomes a different food fundamentally at that point. And that one ingredient that you're missing might extend to a whole lot of different recipes that you have on your menu. So between that, the high rate of inflation that we're seeing, and the fact that restaurants tend to be absorbing more of that hit than they're passing along, the rate of menu inflation. So even though food is getting more expensive, we should know that food is getting primarily more expensive right now in grocery stores. We can look at our menu data and we see quite clearly that, yes, menu prices are going up too. That burger costs a little bit more than it did a few months ago. But that increase in price is less than the increase we see in the general economy. And it tends to be not fully covering the increase in food costs that restaurants and other places that serve food are absorbing. So it makes it sort of tough. And look, it's hard to take price, right? You're a little bit scared to. If you're a restaurant or a restaurant chain, can you really raise the price of your burger $2 and hope that customers don't notice or are understanding? It's a tough decision to make because we haven't faced this in 40 or 50 years at the levels that we have today. So we're trying to help the industry through that right now.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we're both seeing every day here in the UK and over there in the US. And for people that are outside of the industry, can you tell me a bit more about how culling the right data and finding the best tools to interpret and leverage it is actually the key to success right now?
For a long time, the food industry has been driven, I think, by a lot of gut instinct and certainly by creative culinary pursuit as well, which is great. I mean, the culinary art thing is just so vital. We wouldn't have interesting foods if someone didn't try something interesting in the first place. But we really do think that better quality data can make for much better decisions and reduce errors in the innovation pipeline for companies. So when we think about, we happen to just sort of stumble into our first data set, which was a collection of restaurant menus. And it's been important for us to really augment that with many, many other data sets over time. And the operative question for us always is, well, what decisions can we enable? What decisions can we power if we were able to provide another form of insight? So, one of the great things that the world has not solved yet is a fundamental understanding of why people like certain things. Now, this might be a thing that is never solved. Like, we may never know why people truly like things. There are little things that contribute to liking that we understand. The mere exposure effect or the sensory impact of, let's say, foods when they hit your taste buds, for instance. But we wanted to understand too some of the numeric correlations built into that. So we developed a data set called Flavor, which takes a look at pretty much anything you're supposed to put in your mouth, every food, beverage, flavor, ingredient, what have you, and an understanding of, do people like it or not? How does that change by the type of person? Do Gen Zers like it? Do boomers like it? Do they even know what it is? We developed a data set called Scores, which looks at every single item that's released by major restaurant chains and how consumers react to it. Is it something they'd want to order? Is it something that they think is unique? Would they make a special trip for that item? And what you find is once you get to a large enough data set, not just one item or two items, but tens of thousands of items or hundreds of thousands of pieces of individual data or millions in the case of consumer ratings, you can start finding patterns that are really quite interesting. And you can provide not only guidance on, hey, should I squirt this one flavor onto my burger, but what are some of the deeper foundational insights around what liking looks like today? I'll give you an example. The stuff that Gen Z tends to like, and again, we don't want to overgeneralize and say this applies to every Gen Zer, is different than what millennials tend to like as it relates to food. For a long time, it looked like every subsequent generation became a little bit more foodie than the prior generation, right? Really loves food, is into food, wants to learn about food. That number kept going up, up, and up, and up, and up. And the initial pattern would have probably led you to conclude that Gen Zers would be even more into food than the prior generation, because we saw that as we went from boomers to Gen Xers to millennials. But we actually, instead, when we look at the pattern a little more closely, find that it's actually not true. Foodieism peaked with the millennial generation. Now, Gen Z still loves food, but they love it for a different reason. They like it for the newness of food. And again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but this is a broadly observable pattern that we see in one population versus the next. You can ask a very simple question if you want to test this theory. You could actually ask this to your millennial, Gen Z, boomer, Gen X friends and construct the curve yourself. But if you ask someone, what would get you to try something new for the first time, some new food, some new beverage? And your choices are because you think it's going to taste really good, right? That would be your motivator. Or you would try it simply because it's new, that it's new for news' sake. You'll find a really interesting curve where boomers, the generation that are most likely to say, if I'm going to try something new, I want some sort of assurance or confidence that I'm going to really enjoy it. Whereas Gen Zers are on the other side, and they will often tell you, and you can test this numerically, I'll try something new just because it's new. It's the newness of it itself that becomes the motivator. So you could test this philosophically at that level, but you could also see it quite clearly in the data, which is why certain foods that really skew towards Gen Z are things that just sort of like feel new and fun and different. It's sort of like the fanny packs of food, if you will. Boba tea, the little bubbles or tapioca pearls inside your drinks. They're great. We think it's going to be a longer term trend too, but there's something that just feels new and different about that as a beverage, right? Really colorful foods, especially those that are, that are colors that don't naturally occur in nature. Those tend to gravitate toward Gen Z consumers as well. And the list sort of goes on and on. So I think that's really, really just interesting that you could find these patterns and then generalize them a bit more. Or you could focus down on a very specific food or flavor and understand what its impact is going to be. So I think I meandered a little bit, but those are the types of things that we help customers with.
So I was going to say, with the colour side of things there, is that because of sharing it on social media like Instagram, etc., for those vibrant colours? Is it that or something completely different?
I think it's a huge part of it, right? It's the shareability on social media in particular. I mean, you want something that looks wow, and you want to be able to share that with others. And I don't know, like if you show some neon pink food to your typical boomer, they might be like, what the heck is this thing? If you show it to a Gen Zer, they may be a little bit more, again, I don't want to overgeneralize, they may be a little bit more likely to say, I got to try that, I got to take a picture with it. The other thing that I think has been really important in our development, and I think this is important for many companies, is we really focus on making insights both deeper and easier for our customers. Again, a lot of this was very, very gut feel as far as, let's say, food innovation went for a long time. It's like, oh yeah, we should add this cheese to the burger. I think it's going to taste really good. And that's great. We want that. We want the chef's input. But that we could take it so many layers deeper and not just say, well, is this probably a good idea or not a good idea? Who is it a good idea with? Which consumers are going to like it and which ones aren't? But you could get to that layer of insight has been helpful. But more importantly, I think we've made things a lot easier. We've really tried to democratize insights for our industry. We have an industry that has long been defined by, pretty big companies, big food manufacturers or big restaurant chains or big grocery retailers that may have, a couple of people that were the specialists in market research. And they would be sort of tasked with, being gatekeepers to information and then syndicating it out to all of their stakeholders inside their company, right? So they would provide they'd collate the insights and share them with their marketing teams, their sales teams, their culinary teams, et cetera. They're enormously important folks, and we want to support them as best we can. But we also thought there's some aspects of that we could just democratize and put directly in the hands of the end stakeholder as well. And the only way you could do that is by making your platform super easy to use. So we have an online platform we call Snap, which anyone can just jump into, type in anything, and it tells you everything you want to know about that food, flavor. If you're looking to sell something, let's say to the restaurant industry, you could type in an address and it shows you all your selling possibilities nearby. If you're a purveyor of mac and cheese, you want to find all the restaurants in your state that already have mac and cheese on the menu, so you can maybe sell them your product instead. You can do that very, very simply, effectively with minimal or no training, right? We just try to make things super easy to use. And even though we are a B2B company, I think we've taken a B2C approach in the development of our user interface and experience. We wanted to make it simple. We want to make it compelling and just feel fun to use, frankly.
And I love how Datassential is using both technology and data to judge the performance of certain dishes. But I'm curious, how do these tools benefit its customers too? What's in it for them?
Oh, it's I think enormously helpful. The new product failure rate is quite high. Whether it's retail, in retail, the new product failure rate approaches or exceeds 80% in the food industry. So most products that make it on the shelf don't stay there very long because they just don't find the audience that they were hoping to. In the world of food service or the restaurant world, there's often things that, well, you've seen it. And actually, I don't know off the top of my head because I don't live in the UK, but I'd be curious to get your perspective. The US market is heavily driven by limited time offers, LTOs, right? Restaurant chains that, every 6 weeks will have a new dish available just for a limited time, and that's where the marketing, the promotion sort of tends toward. Is that sort of the way chain restaurants operate in the UK as well?
Yeah, it's starting to happen more and more, especially in the bigger, even the coffee shops, of course, with Starbucks and the pumpkin spice latte and all that kind of thing. It is that limited time deal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great. And I apologize, I should know this because we actually have data for the UK. I just don't have the personal experience of living there. But having success with those is quite important, right? Because you're not just talking about the sale of that particular item, but how do you keep your brand always new, interesting, fresh in the consumer's minds? And look, for a restaurant, it's just about the menu. So if this is the item you're going to be talking about, you want to be sure that it's an item that's going to find the audience that it does and convey the message that you want it to have for your menus. So we do, in addition to being able to monitor everything that's happening at other restaurants and what consumers think of those, you can actually just push button test your own, let's say, new menu ideas. Just type in the idea that you have for your new dish or what you're considering in your innovation pipeline, hit go, and the system will bring in consumer responses and benchmark that against the universe of everything else that other chains like you or across the industry have done and said, hey, you're like in a really high percentile. You have a superstar idea over here versus you have something that's maybe rejiggering a bit versus something that says, well, you know what? This is probably going to be a strong seller for you, but it's not going to be that differentiated, right? It's going to be sort of like a workhorse of your menu. And then you have some items that are more like, oh, this is really an outstanding item. It's probably not going to sell a ton, but it's going to be well differentiated. It'll find enough volume that it's worthwhile doing, and it'll make you feel newer, different, fresh, just more unique than, let's say, all the other burger places that you compete with. So understanding not just are you going to sell this, but what role is it going to play for you is something that we can do too.
And of course, as this is a tech podcast, we'll have a lot of people listening that likes to take a peek behind the curtain, look under the hood at everything that makes it all happen. So can you tell me a little bit more about the tech behind your food tech insights and the different kind of models that you use without revealing your secret recipe, of course?
Sure. I mean, I think at its core, a lot of what we do is statistical based. And our history has been one where we've probably built more than bought, I would say, and there are reasons for that. Now, we certainly do use some tools, whether it's for our own internal analysis or for testing ideas before we can commercialize them. We're on Snowflake. We use Looker. We use a little bit of Alteryx for some of the data examination. But a lot of what we've really done has been internally built tools as well as internally assembled data sets. And for good reason. We've often found that when you buy something, you might get something that works great off the shelf, but so much configuration is required to make it do precisely what you want it to do. But sometimes it makes more sense to just build a thing from scratch. And it's been really important for us to have end products that our customers use that do very, very specific things. And that's really just what makes these things tick and what allows us to continue to grow. So our product roadmap often starts with an understanding of what is a major pain point for a customer or for a group of customers. And then it's not just solving those pain points, but thinking about all the related things that you could do that take pain and turn them into something that's a little bit more pleasurable. Just flip it completely on its head. And to do that, you often need an extraordinary amount of flexibility in how the data can be assessed and how you can cut it. Even if you're looking, let's say, acquiring a piece of data, you want to make sure it's granular enough that you could build that thing up to whatever you want it to be. You can always put pieces together. It's very hard to subdivide a giant blob, if you will, into the pieces that you then later need. So that's been our approach to building. So it's a combination of build and buy, with I think a little bit of a preference towards build historically.
And I guess just to bring to life everything that we're talking about today, are there any use cases or client stories that you can share that would just bring all that to life? You don't have to mention any names. I appreciate you probably locked down to a few NDAs, but is there anything you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most common things that customers will use us for is just understanding the trendability of what they're considering. If if you think about the way, I think it's actually fascinating. If you think about the way food makes it to your plate, there's a long sequence of decision makers that birth ideas, review ideas, collaborate on ideas, then evaluate them, and finally land on, hey, why should we pick this one cheese over this other cheese to go on a burger? So where we tend to really have the greatest impact is when our data is used foundationally in an innovation cycle that could either be long or short. So let's say you're a sit-down restaurant chain, and you realize that it's really important to be better at burgers than you are. And you'll say, we're going to launch a burger innovation project where we want to come up with the best selection of burgers among our competitive set. We want to be the place people think of when they think of burgers. Our tools are fantastic for that. You start with them, right? You start with an understanding of, what do burger trends look like today? What's differentiated about certain burgers versus others? Which specific ingredients go in different types of burgers, and how do you pair cheddar versus Swiss with a turkey burger versus a beef burger? What happens when that beef burger becomes a little more premium and it's an Angus burger or a Wagyu burger? What should happen there? So all that stuff that used to be just guesswork is now done scientifically with our tools. And that's probably the most powerful use cases, where we can bring our tools in at an early stage and drive a lot of the development of a menu or a new retail food idea. The other thing that I think we do a really great job is, I'll go back to that mac and cheese example. There are a lot of places to sell to. We now cover over 60 different countries in terms of the data that we have on what we call the food service operator universe. All the restaurants, all the other places that serve and sell food, grocery store, you name it. And we know who those locations are. And in many cases, we actually have their menu as well. So if you're trying to sell into this very, very big, global food space, regardless of the country, we can help you find your best opportunities much more effectively than you could with virtually any other data source that we know of. So
incredibly cool. I'm curious, what excites you about predicting food trends with technology and the practice of merging data science with the art of food? Because it's such an eclectic mix, but it works. What excites you about them?
Well, I think if you think about the number of things that you have to do in life that are actually also enjoyable, it's pretty limited. So let's try this, right? I can name eating and sleeping. I don't know what comes next. Like what, can you go past the 5 fingers on one hand in terms of things that you have to do in life that you also find to be very enjoyable?
No.
Some people might say going to the gym. I don't know so much about that. I mean, maybe a little fibbing going on there. But what's crucial for life that's also really enjoyable? Because a lot of the stuff is not always enjoyable, but eating, I think sleeping is. Maybe some people don't like sleep. I figure most people do. So it's pretty small. So I think we feel very fortunate that we get to be working in one of these areas that is just inherently enjoyable, fun. One question you can probably ask your friends is, are you more of a type of person that, eats to live or lives to eat? And I think, myself and most of the folks that work here at Datassential, really, really, really talented people, are more in that live to eat camp, where we just get really excited about food. And the fact that we know we can help usher in the next generation of food trend is just super, super exciting. The fact that we know we can help our customers sell more effectively, right? That they're minimizing their mistakes is exciting. But the thing that excites us the most, I think, is the way in which we approach all of it. And I think there's a simple philosophy, which is we don't want to just be, better than, let's say, the next alternative. We want to be so much better that we're continuously trying to blow the customer's mind, that we're going so far above and beyond in supporting them and viewing our customers as friends, because this is a very small industry. You think about food and you're like, oh my God, food is such a big thing. It's actually not a huge industry. It tends to be that people that come in to work in the world of food, they stay in the world of food. Here's an interesting stat. I'll give you a US-based stat that's actually pretty fascinating. If you look at all the let's say, restaurants that are out there, independent mom and pop restaurants to the big chains, the people that are actually there making decisions on what products to buy and what to put on their menu and, what cheese should they buy. Those folks on average have multiple decades of experience in the industry. They've been here forever. Once you enter the world of food, you typically don't leave, which is why it's so important for us to recognize that the customers we serve, the others that we support, they're our friends, and if they happen to leave their job one place, they're probably going to go someplace else, and we're going to meet again. So we really try to treat the industry as our friends, and I think that makes the job a little bit more fun for everyone too, because it really does have a family type of feel to it.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a bit of research on you guys, and I was reading that you successfully predicted the rise of avocado toast, which has been a huge hit over in the UK and over there in the US and probably around the world too. So I'm curious, are there any other future trends that we should be monitoring to get ahead of the curve?
Yeah, so this is maybe the most interesting question. There are so many trends that are happening right now. And so, yes, avocado toast has certainly exploded. And you could tell by looking at the data. So I'll give you the 30-second version of how trends work, and then we'll talk about some future trends. So we have a model that we've called the menu adoption cycle, which basically says that any food trend, flavor, ingredient moves through a predictable 4-stage life cycle. In that first stage, the trend is maybe starting to show up in high-end restaurant menus or at early stage retail places like a really fancy farmer's market. And about 70% of those trends will actually die. They won't make it past that first stage. But 30% will make it to stage 2, where they're showing up at a really cool gastropub or a really edgy food truck of some sort, or one of those higher end quick serve, fast casual type of places. And then they'll move into another stage that we call proliferation. And then finally, they'll move into a stage called ubiquity, where that trend is everywhere, including the hospital cafeteria. And if you look at the numbers, you can sort of see where trends are in their life cycle by understanding where they're located. Are you finding them in places like that? And what's the rate of change of that trend? So that was very clear for something like avocado toast. It was very clear for things like kale and sriracha and hundreds of other trends over time. But if we want to look towards the future, I think you'd be looking at this. So one, next generation plant-based foods. So plant-based is already quite huge, as I'm sure it is in the UK as well as in the US and around the world. But the next generation of plant-based is sort of that movement. Ingredients like jackfruit, which has been shown to be a really great replacer of pulled pork. In some cases, it sort of has that texture, and with the right sauce, you almost can't tell you're eating a plant and not an animal. Or actually, I want to ask you this. So I'm going to ask you a fish and chips question.
Oh, okay.
Would you eat, I don't know. Now I'm scared what you're going to answer, but would you eat a fish and chip that was made from banana blossoms as opposed to fish?
I would give it a try for sure, because I'm reading more and more about this kind of thing. It's got me intrigued. And I recently wrote an article on this very topic about chocolate without any cocoa and meat that's not meat, and meat created out of complete thin air in some labs as well. So I'm kind of intrigued and want to try it and see what it's like before just saying, no, I'll never touch that. I'm the kind of guy that wants to dive in and just give it a try.
I didn't know if the banana blossoms fish and chips would offend English sensibilities, like, hey, don't touch my fish and chips. But I'm glad you're open to it. They have now at a high-end restaurant steaks that are made from a 3D printer, where the steak is actually printed. It's extruded essentially, and it sort of looks like a steak at the end, especially when you garnish it up. The other thing I think that's happened is there was a time when maybe every year there was just a handful of trends that were really big and important, like the avocado toast and whatnot. We're past that. We're at a point now where there is hundreds, if not thousands, of trends every year. And the trend itself is that short-term fads themselves are now becoming viable trends, that you're going to see more and more food companies and restaurants and grocery stores glom on to things that they know are short-term. Like the industry used to ask, like, oh, how do you, only stick with the trends and avoid the short-term fads? Now the fads themselves will be, again, and this is largely a product of social media, like all those TikTok foods, for instance, right? They're not going to be around very long, but more and more companies are going to turn to those as short-term opportunities. So have you seen things like watermelon with mustard as a TikTok food? So I know this is an audio podcast, but I can see your physical facial reactions as I list these things off. There's something called corn ribs, it's literally corn shaped like, a meat rib, and the list goes on and on and on. So we think that's big. Climate-based foods and climate-based food propositions are certainly going to continue to be a thing. It used to be that the conversation around climate, I think, centered mostly on fossil fuels. Our data shows that more often than not now, consumers are making a link between climate and the food industry. And many food companies, despite having, let's say, some starting sustainability platforms, I think can go significantly deeper, specifically into the area of climate, and really show how their choices can be more climate friendly, whether it's listing, the carbon footprint of the items on their menu, or in some cases transforming their entire supply chain. But the climate thing is going to be quite significant as it relates to the world of food, and frankly, a pretty big opportunity for food companies. And the other one that's really interesting to me, just around health and wellness and this space that we call, functional foods and ingredients. So if you went back to, let's say, the 80s and you asked people, what does healthy mean to you? Then you go back, it's weird to think of the 80s as 40 years ago, but I guess it is. Scary, actually. Yeah. But if you ask people what did healthy mean to you, most of them would have said it's about weight management. It's about, low fat, not eating too much. It's about, Jenny Craig and all the weight loss. And that's sort of what we call healthy 1.0. We got into the early 2000s, and that conversation on health and wellness migrated to something less about weight management, although it was still sort of important, but more to around like natural and organic foods, and foods that were basically feel-good foods that you felt good about eating, primarily because the bad stuff was taken out of the food, right? All the artificial things. And that continues to be a big opportunity for food. And it's almost sort of a core expectation right now. Like when you go to the store, you almost expect to buy food that's a little bit cleaner than it used to be. We're in a third stage now of Healthy 3.0 that it's just really still getting started, which is about foods that are not just not bad for you, but that are positively good for you in some way. This is the entire functional food space. So when you can drink a beverage and it makes you a little mentally sharper, or it gives you a burst of energy, or lowers your risk of something, that you're expecting your food and drinks to deliver something for you that's positive. The other term used for it is positive nutrition. And I think specifically the areas of, mental focus and acuity as being delivered through food and beverage will be a big one going forward. We see that pretty clearly. And also, I think you may see a merging of, or blurring the lines between what is a food product and what is a beauty product as well. So you're going to see things that are, they make you a little bit, make your skin better. They make you a little more pretty in the morning or what have you, but they're consumable. And you're not going to even see these products and ask yourself, well, geez, should I expect to find this in a supermarket or in a cosmetic store? The answer is going to be both. And then finally, robots in food, we think is going to be really quite enormous. It's already started happening. The labor shortage certainly is going to play a role. Many, primarily chains initially, the restaurant chains will say, you know what? It just makes more sense at this point to spend the money, bring in a robot that does the repetitive task that a person used to do, and it's going to make more financial sense for us. And when we sort of validate this with consumers, people are pretty open to robots making food these days, much more than they were so just a few years. And amazingly, if you ask, well, let me ask you this. If you go to a restaurant and you're going to get a recommendation for something to order, would you rather get that recommendation from a person or from an AI that just serves up, a suggestion?
Ooh, that's a tricky one. I would go with, it's a tricky one because I would go with a person that knows me really well. But then at the same time, AI recommends just about everything to me, from a song I might like, a film I might like, or the next thing I want to buy. And for the most part, it knows me better than I know myself. But the only thing I would say on that is, what happens to serendipity when everyone makes a choice for you? And sometimes you just want to dive in and do something off the grid and something you wouldn't normally do.
So I think you need to balance, but it's interesting. Yeah. Boomers on average greatly prefer a person. Today, a majority of Gen Z prefers the AI. Mm-hmm. And we'll more and more see things move in that direction. I think that we may one day get to, and who knows how long this will take, essentially a restaurant with a limitless menu where there's just a ton of different ingredients being used back of house. Robots are preparing the food. They know your personal profile, what you're allergic to, what you like, what your past preferences are. And instead of coming up with a thing and having a board where you see the 50 items on the menu, it's more like Netflix, where there's 100,000 things they could make, and the menu is personalized to you based on all that information. So that may be years or decades off, but it does seem like we're setting the stage for a future like that at some point.
And I'm getting hungry just talking about that, let me tell you. So changing the subject slightly, it's time to have a bit of fun with you now as we've come to the end of the podcast. I'm going to ask you, can you share the funniest or most interesting story that has happened in your career? We all accumulate a few of them throughout the years, but what is yours?
Yeah, I'll give you one example. This is actually almost ridiculous. We give presentations sometimes either to customers or on behalf of customers to their customers. And we're working with one company, and they wanted us to present to one of their customers, a big restaurant chain, on food trends and what the next big thing would be. And I was flying into Denver to give that presentation. I think it was the first generation Bose wireless Quiet Comfort, North. Yeah. I think they're the QC35s, the first gen one. They've gotten even better since. So I'd fall asleep, listening to probably a podcast or something at the time. And then I come to as the plane starts descending, and I pull off my headphones knowing I'm coming into Denver. And I hear the announcement over the speakers saying, we're now descending into Albuquerque. I'm like, what? I'm thinking for a second, is it possible to get on the wrong plane and have no one notice? Like, you'd think there'd be checks against that. And turns out I did not get on the wrong plane. I got on the right plane, but Denver was snowed in. So they diverted to Albuquerque. The plane was landing at around, I think, 12:30 a.m. And the presentation was 8 a.m. the next morning, now in a completely different city, which was Denver. So we land. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I think the rational thing is to just cancel. But that's a terrible thing for your customer. Because if it was us presenting our customer, no big deal. We take the hit. But we're doing it on behalf of a customer for their customer. And you sort of have to do whatever you can in that case. So I went outside. I started walking up to, Uber drivers, and I found one that look, if I pay $1,000 cash, will you drive me to Denver right now? And he agreed to, in a snowstorm. His car was not outfitted for driving in the snow. He didn't have chains on or anything. So it was a crazy, very, very nervous, life-threatening experience because we were skidding out continuously on the way there. I think we turned around multiple times. At some point, we both had to get out of the car. He didn't have any of the tools for a snowstorm, so we both took our credit cards and started chipping away at all the ice, on the windshield. And we finally got to Denver, and I think I made it there with 15 minutes to spare. But the nice thing about this is his grandmother, the driver, lived in Denver, and he hadn't seen her since he was a kid. And I said, look, you cannot try to drive home after this because you're going to be tired, right? You've just driven 7 hours in the snow, and it's been treacherous. You have to promise me that you're going to go see your grandmother. And he did. And he said it was a wonderful experience that he got to, get together with someone he had, a long-lost family member that he hadn't seen in a long time. So that's really nice.
What an amazing story. And again, it's that word again, serendipity, isn't it? The fact that you two met on that day and he's had that experience, and it just makes you wonder sometimes. It's like the universe.
It could have gone the other way. We could have died. So it would have been a really sad story. We just sort of got lucky that I made it to the meeting and he got to see his grandmother. But, nothing's guaranteed in life, I guess.
Absolutely. Oh, man. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. But before I let you go, for anyone listening, just wanting to find out a little bit more information, what's the best starting point for everything and best way of contacting your team?
Just come to our website. You can see a little bit of what we do there. If you're interested in food and the world of food and technology, there's actually a ton of free content that's available there for you at Datassential.com. And we hope to meet soon.
Absolutely. I love chatting with you about how technologies such as databases and algorithms are helping push restaurants, food service providers and food brands into the next era and creating targeted appeals to customers. But more than anything, I think it's your stories. And before we even started recording today, we were chatting about food and joked that we're going to have to start our own food podcast. But absolutely love chatting with you. Hope we can meet in person very soon. But more than anything, thanks for joining me. Thanks,
food's just a fun thing. You've been great. You've been really great. So thank you. Thank you so much. You've been so easy to talk to as well.
Before we started recording today's episode, me and Jack were just talking about food, the very best Vegas buffets, the best plan of attack, and tips on how to get the most out of those things. I just had so much fun, and I genuinely hope to meet him in person very soon. And remember, if you are attending Cisco Live in Vegas, you can just give me a shout and I will meet up with you and say hello. And as always, if you've got any questions or insights or different views or experiences that you'd like to share or come on the podcast, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, slide into the old DMs on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find 2,000 interviews and also how you can work with me. But now it's time for me to spin that wheel once again. Today we talked about food tech. What we're going to talk about tomorrow? Where it stops, nobody knows. But join me tomorrow and I will reveal more. So thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.